We'll go in order. Okay, so I'm Akile Ahmet, and I am a lecturer in the sociology of race at Middlesex.
And I'm Carly Guest, and I'm a lecturer in sociology at Middlesex also. So today we're going to be talking about deconstructing sociology through the sociological self. And what we're doing is offering some sort of reflections on our practice in a module that we have worked on together this past academic year. And we'll explain in a bit more detail what the module is about and what our aims and intentions were with it.
So a couple of years ago now, in 2016, and it's kind of ongoing still, I began some research exploring the experiences of PhD students of colour in London specifically. And this quote kind of resonates a lot with my own experiences, but also just thinking through the idea of radical pedagogy and where it takes place and the space of the classroom being really important. I'm going to read it out. The perpetuation of whiteness as neutral ground and being on the receiving end of othering can at times be very isolating. It often goes beyond questioning my position as a researcher and surfaces in harmless jokes and subtle comments and inferences that draw on cultural and religious stereotypes. In other instances, my choice to adhere to particular religious and cultural practice is completely disregarded, ignored, or seen as an inconvenience. I sometimes find myself questioning the extent to which I belong and whether I'm truly accepted. And it's really important, this concept of belonging has come up in an earlier session that we were both in, and I think we actually have to really unpack what it means and actually be slightly critical of this idea of to belong, because it raises the question is why do we have to belong when the institution should belong to us? So the aims.
So the aims of our presentation today, we're going to situate our practice a little bit, tell you a bit about the institution that we work in and the module that we've been working on together. And as Akile said, we want to sort of critically examine these questions of space and belonging, and particularly this idea of what belonging means in the institution. We're then going to work through some examples of how we've used the sort of space of the classroom, inside and outside of the institution, as a way to think about diffusing power in the institution, and with the aim of sort of trying to collectively create with students a university that belongs to them, rather than that they are expected to belong to or change their behaviours or assimilate to. A lot of these ideas and issues came out in the panel that we just attended, but also in Silhouette's keynote this morning. So I think will resonate with what we're hearing, I guess.
So we, as we said, we both work at Middlesex, which is a post-92 institution. We are in the Department of Criminology and Sociology, and 65% of our undergraduate students come from black and minority ethnic backgrounds. And we're using BME. There was a big discussion this morning, but because the data is put to us that way, we're going to stick to that for this presentation. But despite having a larger number of BME students, only 3.5 professors at Middlesex are black and minority. We don't even know the numbers for black professors at Middlesex. They're not broken down whatsoever. And it's this idea that actually black, minority and ethnic students feel that they are strangers in their own cities. So they enter these hollow walls of academia, whether they be a Russell Group university or not a Russell Group at post-92, the same experiences are occurring across the sector, across all universities. So there's some stats.
So this is a breakdown of the degree awarding gap for our department specifically, and the picture isn't that different to the national picture. When we look at the percentage of white students achieving a first or a 2-1, you can see the figure from 2017 was 73%, and BME students achieving a first or 2-1, the 2017 figure was 55%, and that's the stats you might not be able to see, but they're from 2013 onwards. So they're pretty consistent. So there is, unsurprisingly, a degree awarding gap issue in the department, which is reflective of what's happening of the national picture as well. And what we have been talking about and trying to think about through this module, but also more broadly, is how this idea of belonging, what belonging means, what it means to feel like an institution belongs to you, or you feel you belong to an institution, is really important to addressing and thinking about the degree awarding gap.
So in 2017, the Journal of Race and Ethnicity in Education, I'm sure many of you will have read the special issue, published for Building the Anti-Racist University. And Shirley Ann Tate notes that we've had a lot of research about the challenges faced by undergraduate students of colour and the attainment gap, or grade awarding gap as we like to call it. And a quote that she uses, that I've used, although some people will question the term excellence, but I'm just quoting Shirley Ann Tate before anyone attacks me. Such attainment gaps should make universities ponder what is it about, what happens within their walls, classrooms and curricula that suppresses the emergence of black and minority ethnic student excellence. And I really want you to think about that. What is going on in these institutions? Okay, I mean, in the previous session we did talk about institutional racism and the perpetuousness of whiteness and the curriculum, but something happens in the classroom, yeah?
Yeah, so thinking about the kind of physicality of the space, and that's part of what we wanted to try and disrupt, I think, in how we were teaching this module. And we can reflect on, I think, to what extent that achieves this disruption of power when you're still working within the institution. So we were using, we've drawn on Yuval Davis's idea of, so there were different slides. Yuval Davis's theorization of belonging, to think about how belonging is associated with a social location, the ethical and political value systems that individuals judge their own and others' belonging. So there's a sort of interactive and relational dimension to belonging and feeling like you belong, and a belonging that's related to individual identifications and emotional attachments to various collectivities and groupings. So there's a lot of different dimensions and facets to this idea of belonging, and belonging very often can be, or the idea of kind of creating or achieving belonging can be sort of thrown out as a term that isn't always unpacked. But what we've tried to think about is how we can use radical pedagogies to help create a university that belongs to all students. So how can we do that? How can we kind of break down and think about what belonging means, and particularly what belonging means, I guess, in practice, when we're thinking about what are we actually doing in the classroom, how are we relating to each other, how are we kind of using the space, who are we talking about, who are we talking to, all of these questions, to try and sort of pull out the complexities of belonging in practice. And I think, again, the idea of kind of Silhouette raised a really important point this morning about radical pedagogies and about how, to what extent something kind of remains radical when it can be, when certain practices like active learning can kind of be taken up and used as a sort of flagship pedagogy by the institution. Active learning and active learning spaces that we're going to talk about are something that are really promoted by our institution. So how do we still use those spaces as a way of disrupting and questioning the institution?
And I think, sorry to butt in as well, the idea of a political value system, and we think about universities and what they value and who they value. If racism is about value, and often at the top you have got an all-white elite at the top, they don't value students of colour, and that's recognised through the fact that we have a degree awarding gap, and the fact that we do not have little to no black PhD students. A report, as I mentioned earlier in the session, has just come out saying that numbers are so low that they're underreported, really. So I think this idea of a value system and creating and attempting to, I don't think we've got the answer as such for what we're going to show, but we're attempting to create a system which values the student experience and values alternative assessments and alternative teaching practices. Yeah.
And that goes beyond, I guess, and interrogates how universities like ours can kind of hold up the idea of diversity, of like really valuing diversity in our institution, and really try and push that and question that, I suppose, and not allow the demographic of our student body to just be sort of relied upon and used in...
And not be a marketing tool.
Yeah, absolutely. So the module that we have worked on together is an introductory sociology module called Thinking Sociologically. It's a year-long module. This year just that it's just run, we had approximately 25 BA sociology students. It's a 3-hour session, which might sound quite a long, intensive session.
It's called a leminar.
It's called a leminar, a mix of a seminar and a lecture. Yeah. And the idea, I mean, the idea that, or how we wanted to work with this module is to have a space where our BA sociology cohort are all in a room together, spending time with each other, and creating this sort of cohort identity and really getting a sense of themselves as sociology students and as sociologists. So the aim of the sort of broad aim of the module was to explore and engage with sociological theory and the sociological self, and to deconstruct this idea of sociology, to get students and ourselves kind of questioning the traditions and the assumptions and parameters of the discipline. So through the module, we aim to centre student knowledge, experiences and histories as a way of doing this and addressing this.
So I have the great opportunity of running the first session that they attend on their kind of first week of academic study, and I kind of was trying to get to grips with what do I teach these students on their first day in a 3-hour session, and we've spoken a lot this morning about decolonisation and inclusive curriculum, and what I wanted to open the classroom up with, first of all, is with the reading, because they do have to read. There's always an issue around, do we give students a lot of reading, do we not give students a lot of reading? But the first reading that they get to do, and I've got copies, is a piece by Les Back and Maggie Tate, that's called For Sociological Reconstruction, and what it does, it deconstructs white sociology, and it places Stuart Hall, Du Bois at the centre of a discussion at the founding fathers of sociology. So they get to hear, first of all, that's their first kind of interaction with what sociology is. I mean, it is problematic that I've got a white male's first thing that they read, but I really can't transform that at all. But the paper is really good at kind of highlighting the problems within sociology and the different scholars that they should be sourcing and should be referencing. So we begin with that. I do urge you to listen to the song, and it's always useful as well to print off the lyrics for the students as well to read, and it just gets them thinking about knowledge and how knowledge is created and asking questions to a different medium, because often, as we said in the earlier session today, we've got these traditional methods and of how to teach and what knowledge we value, and it's not always in an article, it's not always in a textbook, it is through music as well, and Silhouette raised that this morning as well. Amazing keynote.
So this is the classroom that we taught this module in. There are 2 active learning rooms at Middlesex. Middlesex is a bit sort of pushed for space, but they do have these rooms which are really great, and you can move the tables around, move the chairs around. There's these whiteboards that students can take off the walls. So we really tried to use this to its full advantage, but so kind of sitting in a circle to discuss readings, to discuss ideas, trying to kind of avoid this kind of setup, I guess, where we're stood at the front kind of imparting knowledge in the students, but actually trying to disrupt some of those hierarchies. And I think there are always questions about what the intentions are of the institution for these kinds of spaces, which are very often linked to, or pedagogies are very often linked to questions around employability and outcomes, those kinds of things. And so perhaps there is something that could be called radical if we're using these institutional spaces as a way of kind of disrupting hierarchies, of bringing in conversations about institutional racism, about white supremacy into this classroom, and through the sort of physical use of the space, which students as well can control and manipulate. So,
and then there's also value in moving outside of your classroom, through secondary schools, through primary schools. Like now, my daughter's in primary school and is constantly going on trips, and you've got to take them out. And it's important that we do have trips to take students out of the classroom. And one gallery that I urge you all, if you haven't attended and gone to see an exhibition, is Autograph, which is led and is solely for black archives, black artists, black photographers. And we did a session there with the students, and students that don't often turn up for this session, and it was something so amazing to be able to look at photographs, and they have photographs, just family photographs as well, studio shots, and all of us, I mean, I found myself seeing photos that were almost some of my own family photos. So what we did is we took them out, and I think you want to say something about the handling of these memories and these photos through, like, the care through the gloves.
Yeah, so the students were kind of asked to put gloves on in order to handle the photos. So these photographs and these objects in this archive were really given care and attention. They were the students, and we were all told these are precious objects. This history needs to be preserved, and they're important, and that translates into the way that we kind of handle them. And I think there was something really important, and there was a real energy in the room. As students, like Akile said, a lot of our students have grown up and lived in London, and these are a lot of London-based artists, so they're kind of recognising places, forging those connections, kind of seeing through the kind of people and places and relationships and the politics and the music, seeing themselves represented. And it was a really exciting day, I think. Where we haven't got loads of time. Another strategy that we use is as a way of sort of theorising the everyday, so giving students a sense that they can use theoretical knowledge, that it isn't just something that's there for them to be absorbed, but actually they're tools that they can use as sociologists. So we do a kind of unboxing exercise where through everyday objects, the students create stories, sort of sociological stories of these objects. And it was a really amazing way of, the stories that came out allowed the students to kind of connect these to their own lives, whilst also sort of drawing in and seeing the relevance of sociological theory, and also the limits of sociological theory. So this was a kind of collective, generative exercise that encouraged students to see these everyday objects and their own lives as sociologically significant.
And another thing that I do in the first session, not only for them to get to know me, and I think again we'll go back to the earlier session today where we were talking about students getting to know us and us getting to know the students, and breaking down that them and us actually, and that we're all learning from each other. We do a crafting exercise where everyone crafts a name tag, and you talk through where your name's from, and it's a really nice way of students just getting up and getting to know each other. Because one thing we had found that at Middlesex is students are coming in, not only do they have caring responsibilities, they've got to get to work, they've got multiple things going on, so they're not doing what certain traditional students would do, is hanging out at the SU or going for lunch, going for drinks, all those things that you assume students do. Actually, they don't have those time. And it was nice for them to get to know each other and then go pick up crafting material. And I have a forthcoming paper, which is called Who is Worthy of These Walls? And it photographs the interior of institutions. And often you see walls full of white professors and successful people on these walls. And actually, our students are also worthy of these walls, and I think that's what we try to get across through our teaching and our practice and our mentoring and all those things. Yeah. We have to stop now, don't we?
But I can say, because Akile won't, it is one of the most incredible and insightful and beautiful papers that really gets into this question of belonging and student experience through a kind of exploration of the walls of the institution and what that feels like for the students you spoke to navigate that. So, thank you. Yeah, look out for it.